So I feel like I need to put a massive disclaimer at the beginning of this respective video. And normally I don't usually put disclaimers like this on my videos in terms of things, because I assume that people are going to keep it classy, keep it cool, in terms of reacting to critical reviews and the like in terms of things. But I feel like I need to essentially put a disclaimer on this one. And because I know how the internet is and I know how people react to this respective series. The following review is an entry into the Legendborn series. I start with the first book, Legendborn, followed by the second book, which is Bloodmarked, as you can see here. And then the latter one is Oathbound, which is this big, this very big third book in the series. The main thing that I will say is keep it classy, y'all. People like things that you do not like. People don't like things that you like. And I think it's worth saying that, we all come into different things, have different experiences with different books, and it's valuable to be able to see how things are and be able to critique them in a way that makes people better informed in terms of the things that they're picking up. And we all have different experiences that inform our worldview and the like. I think that's the sum of it in terms of things, but it's probably not going to be as much of an issue for the first book, which is Legendborn, but I definitely expect, since this is part of a series of reviews for the Legendborn series up to Oathbound, which will be the last book that I pick up in this respective series, I think this disclaimer is warranted because it's definitely going to get a lot heated from here. So just letting y'all know ahead of time. But I think Legendborn is probably going to be the more positive of the reviews in terms of things. And then when we get to Bloodmarked and Oathbound, then y'all will know where I stand in terms of why I'm not continuing the series. But we'll leave it there. Disclaimer, keep it classy. That's all I ask. And I do check the comment section in terms of things. I haven't had to moderate too much in terms of inflammatory comments on my channel at all since the time that I've been on BookTube. So hopefully I can keep it that way, because so many of you are awesome anyway. But I just hope that stays, because I'm going to have some very interesting opinions and probably not in the popular sort for this respective series. So just putting it out there. Hi everyone, my name is Rose, also known as T.A. Summers. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is the second part of my mass reading review series on Tracy Deonn's Legendborn cycle. We are going to be reviewing Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, which is the second book in the Legendborn cycle series. I'll at least hold it up for your reference, because to tell you that I own the physical copy of this respective book, and as you can see, it's kind of it's got a little bit of dust on it in terms of things, but I did end up reading the physical book of this in terms of things. We're gonna talk about this one, and I remember I've done several videos in terms of saying that I would read Legendborn and Bloodmarked together in terms of a video project. That didn't pan out, and I do also remember that on my channel I had initially expressed disappointed that this didn't win the Goodreads Choice Awards when it was nominated for the YA fantasy thing. I am glad that it didn't win in terms of things, because it would not have deserved it. Based on my experiences of going through Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, I can honestly say that this was a major step down from the intrigue of Legendborn, and I'm not gonna have a filter. I'm not gonna have a filter on this video in terms of how disappointing the experience of Bloodmarked was for me. And you know, like it's not that like I started off on a bad note with respect to reading Bloodmarked. It had me for a little while. I was saying, okay, I'm gonna go into this book with a bit of patience, even though there are certain things at the end of Legendborn where I didn't care for it. Without going into too many spoilers to start with, I'm just gonna do an overall kind of general review before I get into spoilers, and I'll mark them with the timestamp and also tell you like where the spoilers begin in terms of stuff, because we'll have to go into spoilers to be able to unpack what went wrong with this book compared to the first one. So just warning y'all right now, but Bloodmarked basically picks up some time after the events of Legendborn, which had a number of harrowing revelations in terms of Bree's identity, in terms of being alongside the scions of Arthur and a secret society that she is a part of on UNC's campus. And you'll find out very quickly in terms of things UNC kind of gets pushed to the wayside, like in terms of environment, it is not as strongly drawn as it was in the first book. That was one of the criticisms that I had of Bloodmarked, without going into too many spoilers. The sense of place that was established in the first book was not present for Bloodmarked. The other aspects of this respective book were that this, like, for the main plot events of what this book chose to do in terms of the harrowing revelations of what happened in the previous book, took way too long to even get to something close to a resolution in this respective book. We went through, let's see how many pages this actually ended up being. I'm not going to count the author's note because that's different, but there was a total of, I think, 551 pages in Bloodmarked that we had to wade through, and easily 300 pages could have been shaved down out of this to bring it to a resolution in terms of things, in terms of what actually happened in this particular novel. But then the other aspect, in addition to the pacing, was actually some of the revelations that were handed down, and Bree's actions in this respective novel did not make sense to me in terms of things. I felt like I was with Bree to begin with for a little while. Like, I was mostly with Bree in terms of like what her reactions to certain things, and like being fully on board with the events of Legendborn in terms of things, with albeit with caveats. Bloodmarked started where I was like, okay, I am quickly losing respect for this character in terms of what she chooses to do in terms of things. And this is not a cozy book. This is not a cozy book. The first one wasn't cozy, and this one is not. And anybody else who is saying that this is a cozy series is definitely lying to you. In terms of things, I've heard so many people try to recommend this series in terms of saying, oh, this is a lighthearted. No. I'm like, please stop lying. Please stop lying about this series being cozy. It is not. It is heavy. It's been heavy from the get-go. It's heavy, and it's heavier in this book in terms of what it chooses to deal with. There are some lighter moments in terms of things, like in terms of where we get to know the characters, like some of their chemistry when it is actually drawn in a way that like is appealing. But overall, a lot of Bloodmarked has a lot of traumatic situations in which Bree has to navigate in terms of things, and especially when it comes to learning more about the root crafters, what Bree ends up doing in terms of reckoning with her ancestors in terms of things. And then towards the end of the novel, where it reaches the point where several things are revealed, and Bree ends up making a big choice that determines what her journey for the next novel in this series, Oathbound, does. I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to have a lot of patience with respect to how this series goes in terms of things, because I do not like how this one came across. And the other aspect that I hear a lot about this respective series in terms of what it talks about with respect to the Black community and reckoning with certain histories in terms of things. We're gonna have to talk about that. I'm trying to not go into too much spoiler territory in terms of things, but there's a lot of trauma with respect to Black history, and I think a lot of people don't realize this is not necessarily the reckoning that it needs to be in terms of being able to responsibly deal with a lot of heavy issues, especially from the POV of like a mainstay Black character in terms of things. It does not do very well with its Black cast at all in terms of things. I even said in my review, Bloodmarked, like Legendborn itself could have done a lot more, I think, in terms of being able to feature more Black characters, and that was a criticism I had of the original novel, but I think it had the opportunity to be able to improve and being able to kind of expand upon it in a way that was positive, and even to the point where it was like you can rectify some of the things that were there and provide text and be affirming in a way that isn't toxic in terms of things. But Bloodmarked showed to me that it was willing to throw all, like basically almost all the Black cast in Bloodmarked were thrown under the bus, between Bree's father having a much reduced presence in Bloodmarked compared to Legendborn. At least Legendborn had him in certain sections where he was front and center and checking in with Bree and that kind of thing. For Bloodmarked, he is mostly absent, and the times that you see him, it's like in terms of harrowing context, in terms of and things where he is not aware of what's going on with Bree. The other aspect is other characters really just felt like they were being thrown under the bus. Vera, who I will talk about in the spoiler heavy portion of this video, Bree did not treat her with respect at all, and that was one of the things that made me so angry at this book. When I kid you not, when I read some of the sections in terms of what Bree does to Vera, the way that she treats Vera and yells at her and screams at her in terms of things, especially knowing what happened to Vera and what happened in terms of the line of things, I was like, I feel sick, and I'm tired of people undermining that in terms of criticisms in this book. You're not being a Black ally if you are blaming somebody for their rape or reducing a character to their rape. And I want to make that abundantly clear in terms of part of the anger that I have for this respective book in terms of the way it chose to do that. And also Bree's actions in terms of things when it came to the latter part of the book, which sets off a course of a motion of events that happen in this respective book. We'll get into it, but I want to start off that in terms of things. Y'all don't know how angry this book made me. Speaking as a Black woman in terms of things, I gave this book, I think, either 1.5 to 2 stars. I think it was, might have been 1.5 stars. Let me look and see. Yeah, I gave it 1.5 stars, but, we'll get into it, y'all. We'll get into it in terms of things, but I don't understand the positive reception to this book, basically in terms of what Bree does and what happens. There are definitely spaces where I'm glad that certain characters, like one of the positives that I'll say about Bloodmarked, where I think like the introduction of Larkin's character in terms of how loyal he is to Bree in terms of things and how that's showcased in the book, that was cool. That was cool with me, and like he was one of the brighter spots in this respective book in terms of like how he was willing to stand up for Bree in terms of things. For a very obvious plot spoilery reasons, Nick is not in this book as much, but he's still a featured character in terms of how the dynamic works in this respective novel, and as his identity as a scion allows him to communicate with Bree in terms of things given the events of the last novel. So he's still a presence, but he's not as much of a presence. Selwyn is a much bigger presence in this novel. And I also said this in my review in terms of things, more the people who like Selwyn's character will probably like parts of Bloodmarked more in terms of things. I kind of think of it in the same way as how people receive in the Twilight series New Moon. If you were more of wanting to get to know Jacob as a character in terms of his history and things like that, people who like that gravitated more towards New Moon in terms of things. And I think it's the same deal with Bloodmarked. If you are more like inclined in terms of following Selwyn's character, this book might appeal to you even more. But I'm gonna put an asterisk on that because I was not a big fan of Selwyn Kane to begin with, not even in Legendborn, with the way that he treats Bree. Basically from start to end, even with some moments in terms of both of them learning about very tough aspects of their respective histories and in terms of things and how they were used as a means to an end in terms of their respective family lines. But I think this book asked a lot for the relationship of Bree and Sel to be recognized in terms of things, because it asks you to ignore a lot of the ways that he treats her, which isn't good. And even in this novel, it's not really that much improved in terms of things. It asks you to overlook certain things in order for that relationship to work. And I was like, nah, I'm not buying that. I'm not buying that at all in terms of things. I'm like, yeah, like as much as you may try to convince me that Bree is overlooking some of the ways that Selwyn treats her, like I can't unsee that. I can't unsee that despite what this book tries to tell me. And another aspect of this where I didn't really like is that we get a very candid portrait of Bree being with Nick in the first book in Legendborn in terms of things. You see certain moments of them where they're being romantic in terms of things and getting closer. It's like that part of the relationship ends up being sidelined, and Bree is more romantically involved, even distinctly romantically involved with Sel, with no kind of regret or remorse in terms of how she emotionally and physically cheats on Nick with Sel in this book. And I had a problem with that in terms of things. I know this is supposed to be an established love triangle in the secondary part of this respective narrative, but I'm like, I can't get behind that. I cannot get behind that at all in terms of how that was done in this respective book, which I was like, oh boy. I'm like, yeah. So there was a lot of mess that was going on in this respective book, and it went on for way too long than this book deserved to be in terms of all the nonsense that happens. So I'll get into it more in the spoiler heavy version of this review, but to essentially kind of wrap up my non-spoiler review of Bloodmarked, there were so many different issues in terms of how things were done in this book. Even like responses to mild critiques of the first book were kind of very heavy-handed in terms of the execution, in terms of how it chose to deal with those criticisms and critiques. And it was very obvious in terms of how it chose to treat its respective Black cast, treat Bree's role and some of the things that she does in terms of things where I essentially just fell off with being all in with her character, because and you can't explain all of that, and I want to make this perfectly clear before I even get into the spoiler heavy part of this book. You can't explain all that Bree does in this book with the grief that she goes through in terms of losing her mom and being in these respective events, or the fact that she's a teenager, to justify what she does in this book. I want to make that abundantly clear. That's disrespectful to people who go through grief, and that's disrespectful to teenagers. And you cannot, and the literally the decisions that Bree makes in here make no sense with respect to how she chooses to proceed with learning a number of different things, with the encounters that she has, and ultimately like what happens in towards the latter part of this book that sets the wheels in motion for even more complicated things to come in the next book. So we'll get into that, but I have to convey my massive disappointment with Bloodmarked as a whole for this second book in the Legendborn cycle. It could have been so much more. It could have been so much better. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about so much of this in this respective review in the spoiler heavy version. But that kind of gives you an overview of the non-spoiler territory that I'm going to talk about in this thing. I gave this 1.5 out of 5 stars. Massively could have been improved in terms of where it chose to go. But we'll talk about some of the things that incensed me and made me fall off. I'll also even talk about some of the things that I liked in this. There were a few things that I liked in here, including, like I said, Larkin's character, including certain pieces where we are able to see Bree come to terms with her grief. A pivotal moment in terms of Bree reconnecting with her mom in terms of things. I thought that was probably one of the highlights of this respective book, where I wish that there were more moments of that kind of connection and a sense of identity and family in terms of things, but we don't get that from this, and we don't get this from this, and it could have been a lot more than what it was, but I'll leave it there. I will also say that with respect to Alice's role in Bloodmarked, I was glad that she had an increased presence in this respective book in terms of things as Bree's best friend, and like navigating the events in terms of what's going on with Bree and how she shows up for Bree in several mentions. But we'll get into the spoiler territory in terms of what happens to Alice that sets off the events of things that are to come in Oathbound. But y'all, and then the other aspect is we didn't really get a remedy to the lack of additional characters with respect to the Black cast of Bloodmarked. And I know that Mariah was a feature of the last novel, so was Samira, but the way that they show up in this respective novel really just feels like they're affirming Bree's journey, and then they disappear fairly quickly in terms of things. Like it's not like they have a presence where it feels like they have more monumental roles in terms of things compared to Bree. And I understand that Bree's the main character, but when you have other Black characters have the right to their own agency and representation, and being able to see their desires, their things front and center. I even said this in my review in terms of things like, I wanted to see more of the Black cast front and center outside of their relationship to Bree in terms of things. And I don't think that's a tall ask to do in terms of things. And also, like, because one of the things in terms of being able to represent characters, you want to be able to represent them with range and agency, and being able to see their joy aside from their pain. You want to be able to see their personal investments, their histories, their things, their other things that are outside of trauma. And that is one of the things that I think Legendborn as a collective series, and we'll get into this with respect to Bloodmarked and then eventually Oathbound, that you're able to see marginalized characters past the pain that they're in. And that is and like the thing about it is, a lot of people try to hold up this series in terms of saying, like, Bree is more than just her pain, but no, her pain was front and center from the very beginning, and at least in terms of Legendborn, it understood the assignment in terms of saying Bree had a personal investment in terms of why she chose to go into the secret society, in terms of being able to learn more about her mama, in terms of being able to learn more about the secret society, what secrets her mother was keeping, in terms of things like that made her want to know more about her own magic and power. In terms of things in Legendborn, there was a setup to where it eventually could have those reckonings in future books of the series. Bloodmarked really dropped the ball in terms of being able to develop that this past a point of pain in terms of things. If anything, Bloodmarked kind of affirmed a lot of different things of pain in terms of things. And and even wanting to know more about Bree in terms of being able to see more dimensions of her character, as well as some of the other characters that are in this book, I think it really did not do that with respect to its marginalized cast, with respect to some of the other root crafters, to Mariah's character, to Samira's character. We really only see them as accessories to affirming Bree's journey, and then they disappear as soon as they're not, as soon as they're in, they're out. And I am not a fan of using marginalized characters as means to an end in terms of things, and we'll get into that in the spoiler territory of this book. The other aspect that I wanted to also mention is that the only Black boy representation that we have seen in this series is a half demon named Valak, who gets introduced into this book. And he is very, very shady, to say the least. Especially in terms of how he shows up and in the relationship, in terms of where he shows up in this book, in terms of things. It's not that he's... I don't want to label his existence as a bad character, because he's not like that. That would be reducing his role too much in terms of things, especially with respect to what happens. He ends up being an ally, but it's not really the best of drawings in terms of the characters. If we're trying to talk about positive representation of Black characters in terms of things, aside from traumatic situations, aside from vilification in terms of things, it's like Valak's character is a lie, to say the least. And it's interesting in terms of how little, like in terms of stuff you would think there would be more Black boys, Black men, or even a more pronounced role for Bree's father in terms of his relationship with Bree, but we don't get that from this respective book at all in terms of things. We see a lot of the white characters, we see a lot of the scions, we see some of their roles in terms of things, and we see a lot of the situations in terms of where they're reckoning with trauma, but it's not drawn in a way that feels like it's giving agency to all of its characters. So that, I think that's a point to make about Bloodmarked in terms of the direction that it chooses to go in, and the way that it showcases certain characters compared to others in terms of things. That I found that to be quite the problem in terms of things. And I wasn't a fan of how certain characters just showed up to affirm Bree's journey and then were quickly bounced out when they weren't used in terms of things. And then essentially what happens to the fate of certain characters by the end of this book in terms of some of the things that happen, especially with respect to how Bree has her respective magic and what the choices that she makes and the events that happen in terms of things. It gets dicey and removes her agency in a way that I didn't like the direction of. I'll just say it like that. And I'm trying not to be angry about it. I'm trying not to be angry about it. But I wanted to make that point very clear. We'll talk about it in the spoiler section. But okay then, so are y'all ready for the spoiler part of this video? So I'm going to put the timestamp up for your reference in terms of here, as well as with respect to the chapters that I create on YouTube to mark the spoiler heavy stuff. So this is your warning. If you are planning to read Legendborn as well as Bloodmarked, this is the point where you should stop. Essentially, like, I'm not going to go into too much more detail in terms of things. I told y'all I rated this 1.5 out of 5 stars. That's your warning in terms of saying, like, I did not care for this book. There were so many problems that I had with it, as explained in my non-spoiler heavy review part of this review. This is your warning where we're going to get into spoilerish territory for both Legendborn as well as Bloodmarked, and that point begins now. Alright, streamlined, spoiler heavy version in terms of this review. Y'all have been warned. In terms of the events of Legendborn, and this is spoilers for Legendborn in terms of things. In the last book, Nick was abducted in terms of things, and is in a position where he is not able to get help. And essentially he has been missing. Bree and Sel find out towards the end of that, like, Bree's mom and Selwyn's mom knew each other when they were attending as students at UNC Chapel Hill, and that the Order had been monitoring them in terms of things for their respective roles. And it's messy. It's very, very messy in terms of how things transpired in terms of things. But Nick is missing. And when Bloodmarked starts, in terms of things, there's a lot of politic involved in terms of the search for him. But it's not all like in terms of things like in terms of where Bloodmarked starts. You find that because of the events that happen in the cave, where Bree pulls Excalibur, that she is the true scion of Arthur, while Nick is not the true scion of Arthur as they believed, but rather Lancelot. And that changes the dynamic of a lot of different things in terms of stuff. So Bree is reeling, not at the beginning of this novel, Bree is reeling from the fact that she is not only the scion of Arthur, but also the harrowing losses of deaths of those who were with her in the cave. And it definitely weighs heavy to begin with for the events of Bloodmarked. As I said before, this series is trauma heavy, like, in terms of stuff. It is not a light series. It's not a cozy series. Like, even Legendborn, from beginning to end, started with trauma, ended with trauma. Bloodmarked starts in the same place with losses that are marked in trauma. And you also find out that Bree is the literal definition in terms of being a scion of Arthur, because her ancestor was raped, in terms of making her the scion of Arthur. So, tell me again how this is black girl magic in terms of things. Whew. Trauma. A lot of trauma. Okay. So, this is where Bloodmarked starts. Okay. Bree is reeling from that revelation, but it is not widely known that Bree is the true scion of Arthur. They have to contend with the losses of the Legendborn in terms of things, the events that happen in the cave, the fact that Nick is missing, and of course the council is concerned in terms of things like, you know, that they Bree has to hold her tongue because they think she's still a pledge, and like she was just taken under Nick's wing at the end of events in Legendborn, in terms of agreeing to be, you know, like serving under him in terms of things for and being part of this group. But they don't know her true identity, like that she's not simply a pledge, that she is the true scion of Author. And at this event, Bree realizes that it's not just the fact that they're grieving the people who have been lost, the Legendborn that have been lost, and the families are attending this funeral. In terms of things, Nick is missing, and there has to be they have to have an explanation. The group is demanding an explanation, especially some of the grieving parents of the Legendborn that have been lost. They're asking for answers in terms of things, and rightly so, in terms of what has gone on. But the council takes this moment to throw Selwyn under the bus and blame him for all the stuff that's been going on. And, like, I don't like Selwyn's character, but, like, I could at least feel for Bree in the same way. It's like, wait a minute, that's not right. Like, that he's not the problem here. Y'all just threw him under the bus for no reason, just because it was convenient to throw him under the bus. And, essentially that happens. And so Selwyn is presumed on the run. Bree is the scion of Author and asked to keep it secret, even though she doesn't want to keep it secret. And Larkin is tasked with protecting her because Selwyn's missing. And basically the people, to be fair, Larkin is a solid introductory character in this respective novel. You can tell that he cares for Bree in terms of things that happen in the novel. He tries to tell her, hey, you need to understand that if certain pieces of information get into the wrong hands, you can be in a world of trouble in terms of things. Bree ends up getting into like a heap of trouble in terms of things in another instance where she is targeted. She and Larkin are targeted in a specific attack. When Larkin is downed, Bree's in trouble, and then Selwyn shows up to save her. And then once Selwyn saves her, the council is lieges in terms of coming in to arrest him because they think he's the problem, but it's not the problem that Bree knows that they're pinning on him. It's other things that it leads to him being accused of in terms of his respective apprehension in terms of things. So, and this is the part where Bree reveals to them, hey, I'm the true scion of Arthur, which I'm like, you girl, what have you done? What have you done in terms of things? So things keep happening, like, that happening for reasons. Bree ends up, and the council's in a position where it's like, Bree's the scion of Author. They don't want her to be because of her identity, because she's not white or male in terms of things that the racism is there. And the other aspect of it is that events lead to where Bree is essentially told that she has to lie low, that she has to basically not go to classes in terms of things. At first, when when events had happened in terms of them not knowing she was the scion of Author, and at the beginning of the novel they were saying they were telling the Legendborn, go to classes, do your regular thing, don't do anything until the council has the chance to meet in terms of things, and they have the funeral and that kind of thing. But then when Bree ends up revealing that she's a scion of Author in terms of stuff, that changes the whole landscape of things. And then when they realize her respective identity and ability even, they essentially, the Institute, basically holds her captive against her will, drugs her, holds her against her will, and asks her a bunch of questions against her will in terms of things. And this is all under the cover of the Institute in terms of things. Never mind that, Bree's father doesn't know where his daughter is and doesn't check in with her for a week or what have you, which if it had been my parents, my very black parents, I'd be I could have gone 1 or 2 days and they were like, what are you doing? So it's just I feel a certain type of way about it. And, you know, like, there's not, like, a strong sense of place for this novel compared to Legendborn. Like in Bloodmarked, there's attention to sparse details relating to things that happen in Chapel Hill, but it's largely off the campus of UNC Chapel Hill in terms of things, and there's not a central sense of place and identity as strongly as the first book. So if you're expecting a dark academia type school focused environment, you're not going to get it in Bloodmarked at all, and it gets even worse in Oathbound, but we'll discuss that later. So in the institute, you know, Bree is being drugged, and William, you know, like in terms of stuff, like knows that certain things are wrong in terms of stuff, and there's a led attempt to between Larkin, between Will, between several of the Legendborn who realize that Bree is in trouble. Alice is there too. They get her out in terms of that respective encounter in terms of things, and like I had a lot of problems with this respective how it was done in terms of Bree's respective capture as well as her drugging in terms of stuff, because I'm like, how do you not link that to Black trauma in terms of things? Black people have a very long history of medical experimentation and being forced to do things against their will. If you look anything like into the history of, say, for example, eugenics in North Carolina, one of the last states to end the eugenics practice in terms of forceful sterilization, among other things, medical experimentation, taking things that they weren't allowed to take in terms of stuff because there were poor people in terms of things. Black people in the United States, Black Americans, have been subjected to number of different things in terms of the long history of experimentation and exploitation in terms of things. So for me, this was a choice, and I didn't like how it's not so much that I don't think the issue needs to be addressed in terms of things. I don't like how it was handled in this novel at all in terms of things. And Bree has considerably less agency and say in this novel than she did in Legendborn in terms of things. So, and that continues along with the fact that she is the scion of author, and she is basically possessed by this dude who wants to do his own thing, as becomes abundantly clear as the novel comes on. But talking about that, I'll leave it there. Also, by the way, when Bree was made to escape in terms of things from the institute, Larkin brings an unconscious cell along with everybody, like in terms of getting Bree out of that situation and trying to figure out what to do next in terms of things. That ends up leading to the group being attacked and betrayed by a demon whose name is Kezia, if I remember correctly. And that ambush nearly gets Bree killed, but Cell and the others are able to save her from that predicament in terms of things. And it's a harrowing battle that happens and betrayal that happens that leads to one of the people who betrayed them. I'm not gonna spoil like in terms of things, and like I'm blanking on his name, but he was one of the major characters that ended up betraying them, and he ends up dying pretty handily, like in terms of that respective scene for things. And Alice feels bad about it in terms of things, but Sal does not care. And essentially after Kezia's attack, the group are trying to look for information in terms of Bree, and so they end up getting a tip to being able to go to this underground club, which is called Crossroads. And essentially at Crossroads, they try to blend in basically like try to make themselves older than what they are able to get in from the bouncer in terms of stuff, but things go wrong in the crossroads and they end up meeting a 205-year-old half human half demon named Valak, who essentially looks like he's 18 years old, and he's the only black boy representation in this respective novel in this whole entire series to begin with. And he's very sketchy and very much is the purveyor of deals that are not necessarily the best or the most ethical when things happen in this respective novel in terms of things. And after a set of events that happen, Valak ends up being their ally, as well as the cousin to Mariah, who ends up who wonders what on earth they're doing there, and and essentially thinks that Bree is back at Carolina, but she's not. Clearly, she's not. Something I also forgot to mention with respect to what happens in Crossroads when Bree and Sel are encountering Valak, and you know, they're trying to avoid being suspicious or like telling Valak anything, but Valak is able to see through them in terms of the whole sign of author thing and the fact that they're hiding stuff from him. And essentially, Valak removes a mesmer that Sel had put over Bree against her will, had been mesmering her the whole time and manipulating like the way that she sees him, because he wanted to hide his demon side becoming more prominent. And Bree is mad about it in terms of, as she should be. She should be mad at the fact that he mesmered her to conceal his appearance in terms of stuff against her. Well, she doesn't take it well, but there are so many other things that Bree could be mad at Sel for in terms of the things that he says and does, and essentially she decides to be with him anyway in terms of things. Never mind that, you know, like Bree witnessed the fact that with Sel, that the fact that Nick killed the person that killed his father, which that's a major thing that happened in terms of events, and that's what led to like they go to try to rescue Nick, but Nick in terms of things essentially like is in this place that isn't too far from where they were, and essentially leaves them after he kills Zhao, who is the person who tried to kill him and his father. Father ends up getting killed by Zhao's attack, and Nick essentially just turns around and kills Zhao because of killing his father, and they have the nerve to judge him for that. But then yet Bree somehow a lot of stuff just doesn't make sense. They end up reuniting, and essentially they all end up going to a place called Volition, which is the place where many black women and girls, root crafters, are essentially like being protected in this barrier area, like in terms of things like it's protected by the ancestors, the magic of the ancestors, and it is a space where Bree is able to be able to call upon the spirit of her ancestors. And this gets dicey very quickly in terms of things because of things that happen. Of course, like it's a moment in terms of where, you know, Bree is able to meet other root crafters, and you would think a moment like that would provide more spaces and opportunities for Bree to associate with people who are like her, being able to have connections and build connections in terms of things. But then it turns out things go wrong fairly quickly. I think with respect to when the novel moves to Volition, there are potential moments where this could be affirming for Bree's identity and being able to reunite with her ancestors and be able to get answers. But you learn very quickly, and I'm going to sum this up the best that I can in terms of things, and I'll probably read a few passages that really just made me angry the further I read. But essentially what happens in Volition, and she's in this space, it's only Volition is really only for the ancestors that are root crafters. It's for Black women. It's kind of this space in terms of where they seek refuge for things, and the other people who are not part of that uh like identity and on terms of state things can only be invited in. And so Bree basically uses her pull to be able to invite Cell and the others who can't go into this space in terms of things, which I felt a certain type of way about, but okay. Essentially what happens at Volition is the fact that Bree is able to call upon her ancestors, including her mother, including Vera, in terms of all the women who had departed too soon. And essentially she's asking for answers about her power. And the thing that made me some kind of angry when it came to that respective scene is that Bree does not get the answers that she seeks. Basically, like, says, y'all are useless to me, and essentially gets mad at Vera, and the disrespect that she shows towards Vera, like, really just made me mad, and really just made me mad. And she ends up in the encounter, in terms of things like, she essentially, Bree is using her ancestors as a means to an end to find out about her magic, and when she doesn't get the answers that she wants, she blows a hole in Volition's barrier in terms of things and leaves them all like not in the best protection thing. And oh boy, it's infuriating to say the least. Fast forward to this ambush and encounter, like, in terms of things after Volition's like barrier is unprotected. Bree essentially is possessed by the spirit of Arthur in terms of stuff, and just I was already upset about the fact that Arthur is a person who really has his own motivations in terms of things, in terms of wanting to do his own thing apart from Bree, but he's in Bree's body. And the fact that we have a white man who basically takes hold of a Black girl's body to do his bidding happens in the way that you would expect it to happen, in terms of being a terrible thing. And terrible things happen in terms of Arthur taking hold of Bree's body, in terms of things, and they try, like, her companions do the best that they can to try to get Bree back in terms of things, but Alice ends up getting thrown against a van in terms of things and put into a coma. Cell has to sacrifice his humanity to save Bree in terms of things. Essentially, Nick gets battered and bruised at this thingy, and essentially, like, it's just brutal in terms of the way that this fallout happens, in terms of Bree getting taken over by Arthur and just things going south from there. And what does Bree get out of that in terms of things that happen? She decides, oh, Arthur did all of this nonsense to me in terms of things, and justifiably, Bree is angry at that Arthur was able to possess her and do all of these things. But what does she do? She takes it out on her ancestors. She burns the ancestor plane down. I'm like, where does that make sense? Where does that make sense? Let me read y'all the passage and do that. Bree being possessed by Arthur, and the events that happen with respect to landing Alice in a coma. Cell being more demon than human in terms of how he sacrificed his humanity for her in terms of things. She turns around and decides to burn her ancestral plane. So what I'm this decision does not make sense to me, because I can understand being angry at Arthur for possessing her and essentially doing everything that he did in terms of things. That I can understand. And yes, this is a white man, white spiritual man who took hold of a black girl's body in terms and did what he wanted with her body, which that's a violation in and of itself. I'm like, oh my god, what are y'all thinking? But then she turns around and decides to burn her ancestral plane. And let me read this for y'all, because I was like, girl, what in the world are you doing? I'm like, that makes no kind of sense in terms of things. Arthur was the one who did this nonsense to you. Like, in terms of things, it wasn't your ancestors that did this. So she summons her ancestors. This starts on page 545, and I'm just going to read this to y'all. I kneel in the next stream and let my root burn through the water until it boils around me. Hot, hotter, hottest again. No longer the point of the spear, the tip of an arrow. Not the strongest girl anyone knows. Not the most incredible girl or the impossible one. No longer the pain-wielded blade. No longer a blade at all. No one's weapon but my own. I burn the ancestral plane until it dries up, until the bed turns to dust and the voices die down to silence. Vera gasps beside me. What have you done? I turn to her and everything feels so clear. You said they ran so I wouldn't have to, but I think they ran so I could choose one day, and today I choose me. You are a child, too young to understand what you have done. Vera shakes her head slowly, turns transparent. I can no longer help you. I stand. Don't you see? I don't want your help. Not when it ends this way, feels this way. She is near fading, a red wisp of light. Then take my warning instead. And that is, I whisper, you don't want the weight of us, but consider where that leaves you. Consider that chaos favors imbalance. Which, that was a choice. And I'll admit, I lost respect for Bree at that moment in terms of stuff. I'm like, no, girl, you chose wrong, very wrong. Grief did not make you do that. That was a conscious choice, and it was a selfish choice, and it was gross in terms of things. You burn your connection to your ancestry, any kind of thing that they could give you, even if it wasn't much, you burn that to the ground in terms of things to where you could longer contact them. How is that being connected to, how is that fostering community? How is that any kind of regard, or like Bree's disrespect of her ancestors and essentially using them as a means to, and I was like, no, girl, like, you lost me. You lost me for things that you did to, even if you were, even being, like, I can understand being possessed by Arthur and not being able to control the things that she did, but she was a 100% in control of doing this. She was in 100% in control of doing this, and yeah, she lost me there, among other things. What's even worse about this, and this is literally pages from the final scene in the book in terms of things, Erebus being the Shadow King, that is being revealed at the end of this book in terms of things. She makes a deal with the Shadow King, the root of the problem in terms of things, in order to learn about her powers. What? Where does that make sense? You have to understand in terms of how angry the ending of this book made me in terms of things. It's like, how does this make sense? You burn your ancestral plane so that you can't even contact your ancestors in terms of things. Like, they may not have been directly able to help you wield your power, but they could have helped you on other things, other pieces of advice, other things. and you walk right into the hands of your enemy and ask him to make a deal with him to be able to wield your magic. How in the world does that make sense? That's an abusive relationship right there. And she could have chose so many different routes and paths in terms of thing. It's like, I understand not wanting to be possessed by Arthur and being like, you know, like in terms of being angry about that. But why on earth did she take it out on her ancestral plane? And why on earth did she walk into the hands of the enemy to be able to learn more about herself? And she said, I want to do this on my own, but walk into the hands of this abusive situation with her blood mark. I'm like, where? How does that make sense? Black girl magic, that is not. Like in terms of things, it's like it's walking into situations that she didn't have to walk into in terms of that. I was so mad. I'm still mad in terms of the ending of Bloodmarked, but I was like, okay, I know that I want to be able to read Oathbound to see where this goes. And I'm like, there may be, is there a constructive way that this can end? I don't think there is. I don't think there is in terms of things. I don't really like Bree's character anymore in terms of things. It's like, I don't really want to follow this really selfish girl who is just making the colossally, and it's disrespectful to try to say that this is just Bree acting in pain and grief and, being a teenager. This is more than that. This is conscious decisions on Bree. And Vera was right on the money. She's like, you don't understand what you have done. She was trying to warn her. It's like there were so many other routes that Bree could have taken. And it's like she chose the absolutely worst one and the most abusive one in terms of things. There could have been other things that she could have potentially done, had acted with her own agency, but she walked right into what is clearly an abusive abusive situation. And it's not lost upon me that Bree is judging Vera in terms of the decision she made and not reckoning with that in terms of things and trying to protect her line. And like, I can understand Bree's anger in terms of what it like the short lives that that her family were subjected to because of the deal, but that wasn't on Vera. Like, blame the deal itself, blame the horrible thing that, like, you know, Vera like was forced to think, but then yet Bree makes this decision to burn her ancestral plane and then walks right into the abusive relationship that she has with Erebus, the Shadow King, to be able to hone her power. Girl, you have no right to judge Vera for what she did. She tried to do things and did not know what this the situation was. You knew damn well what you were going into with respect to how Erebus was and who Erebus was, and yet you did that. So that is Bloodmarked. That is Bloodmarked. I like, when I finished Bloodmarked in terms of the overarching ending, I was like, okay, it's going to be a tall order in terms of how this series will progress given the events in this one, in terms of the decisions that Bree makes that can't be reversed, and essentially the things that have happened to her and her friends in terms of things. Alice being in a coma, you know, and in terms of that situation, Nick being in a terrible situation himself in terms of things, Cell sacrificing himself, his humanity, to save her as well, and other aspects of this, and she ends up walking right into the arms of the enemy that they're trying to push back against. So, how is this blood girl magic again? How is this not trauma central in terms of things? you know, it's a lot. It's a lot. And, you know, like, I kind of, like, I can understand, like, you know, people being critical of the series in terms of how this ended, because I felt that same way. I felt that same way, and I'm like, I don't know how this resolves for this respective book in terms of things. We're going to get into Oathbound. I've already read Oathbound at the time of this video in terms of filming it, so I already know what happens, but I think this is the point where I'm going to stop it in terms of things, because I don't want to get into too much of the weeds of what happens in Oathbound. I'd rather leave that for its own video. But I want to tell y'all that there was so much about Bloodmarked that could have been better. Could have been better. There were choices that were made, contradictions that were very clear, and I struggle to see how this is deemed black girl magic when Bree was continuously using and being used it as a means to an end in several spaces in this book. And like, you know, we can talk about, you know, black trauma and the history of certain things that were revealed in this respective book as relating to real world things, but the way that this book handles them is not responsible at all. And the trauma that is essentially showcased in this respective book, because it's a lot of trauma. It's a lot of trauma. Some of it is by Bree's own actions, and she is not reckoning with the weight of those actions in terms of things. And it makes no sense that she makes the decisions that she does in terms of how she chooses to go about learning about her power, like walking into the hands of this white man, aka the Erebus, aka the Shadow King, who has his own motivations in terms of things, and wanting to use her be able to use her magic. She couldn't call upon her ancestors, but yet she walks into this abusive man's creature's realm, hands. I mm-mm 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 yeah, it's exhausting to see that happen, but I'm gonna leave my I'm gonna leave my thoughts on what happens in Oathbound to Oathbound, but this cliffhanger, did not make sense. And it was a sour note in terms of ending this book, in terms of the slog that we had to read through in terms of things in order to get there. There were so many other choices that could have been made. There are more ways to handle some of the heavier themes, if those things were even going to be addressed in this, in terms of things that would have given Bree way more agency, way more ways of being it for the journey to feel fulfilling than where this ended. And I'm not going to spend too much more time on this. I think I think it's probably better that I end it here, because yeah, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. Like, I was exhausted from finishing this book, and now I'm exhausted from recounting the frustration and the anger that I have in terms of how this landed and the wasted potential of it in terms of things. So let's end it there. If you made it this far, thank you. It's hard to find I have plenty of words to say, but I'm trying to hold back in terms of things. But thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be informed of when I post new videos. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next video.